Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about really one of the interesting things I've noted over the years that tons of people who discuss how the bench press isn't a good exercise for the chest or how they don't feel their chest on the bench press. The interesting thing, a lot of them still don't have good chest development. Many influencers, many other people out there who make those claims, they still don't have a big chest. And yet, when you look at the literature, you look at all of history, bench press has always been a good chest exercise. It has always been. Every single study in which researchers made people bench correctly and follow any sort of decent program, and I'm not saying the studies are great or that exercise science in its current format for lifting is particularly good. The quality of the science is very low, but study after study still always shows chest growth from the bench press. Why? Well, because it works the chest. Okay? Works the chest. Historically, how many professional bodybuilders who had massive chests have loved the bench press and been big advocates of it? The majority of them, right? Very common for that to be the case, right? Go back in time to even more golden era times when the bench press was one of the primary movements. They had less equipment. Oftentimes they had proportionately larger chests than shoulders and arms compared to today's bodybuilders, just in the proportions. So what does this tell you? Maybe the bench press really is a good chest exercise. And I think the thing with that, when you see lifters who claim that it isn't, it's usually a good indicator of almost their training IQ. Because when you get someone who's like, well, I try to bench and I don't feel my chest and all these things, and then you look at how they bench, it's like, you're telling me you can't figure out how to perform an exercise? And I get that. Different people have different experience levels and they're not thinking through, but it's like, you're telling me you can't figure out how to perform an exercise in which the pectorals are generally the primary mover, at least by a slight bias compared to other muscles. You can't figure out how to perform it in that way? I think that's usually a case of a low body awareness. It's a case of inability to focus. Usually the case of ego lifting. And I'm going to say that's the biggest problem we run into with that. Now, if people have a good chest genetics, they can still get away with that. And I think that's where some of that comes from. You see people who do all sorts of goofy stuff who have massive chests and they do bench pressing, who do it incorrectly. But it's because of genetics, stuff they're taking, all that combination. Okay, usually when you see guys who struggle with chest development from the bench, who do bench, and they're like, I can't feel it, you watch how they perform it, usually bouncing off the chest, maybe excessive arch. They use grip widths that are way too wide or way too narrow, so that they bias a little more tricep or a little more front delt. Going way too wide will shift some focus to the delts because you're stretching the pecs less, right? People need to remember that. If you go wide enough that your forearms are turning to outward angles when you touch the chest, you are reducing stretch on the chest. You go really, really narrow, you are shifting some of the emphasis to the triceps. Okay? And that's usually how it is. They're usually performing it incorrectly, but usually excessive arching or bouncing off the chest. Those are big, big ones. Okay? Cut the arch down reasonable. Pause on your chest. Okay? Pause on your chest. That'll resolve most of that. But again, it's observing how people do this stuff. But here's the issue. I think the problem we run into there too is the ego lifting on the bench. And it's because, for some reason, even people who are trying to use it to build their chest, they go into full bro ego mode when they get on the bench, and they can't seem to separate that is literally what's causing them the problems. If you guys watch the way I'm benching in this video, look at the biomechanics involved of how I'm performing it. Is there any doubt, like anyone who understands basic human movement, is there any doubt that my chest is getting more work than the other muscles the way I'm performing it? I'm running very, very little arch, just enough to stay tight, because you're going to have some natural arch. That's like unavoidable. But I'm just in my normal, natural position for that when I do it. I'm gripping it at a weight that where the wrists are stacked, the forearms are close to 90 degrees at the bottom, so the chest is stretching the most. Pause on every rep at the bottom. Okay? There you go. Same thing when you get people who are like, well, my shoulders hurt, and you look how they're benching. It's like, well, consider your ego lifting. Okay? And you guys have seen me in the past rep 315. I'm not saying it's because you're going too heavy for your strength, but if you it's not because you're going too heavy, you're going too heavy for your strength level. You haven't built up the tissue to support it. Ego lifting. Bouncing the weight. Not stacking your wrist. Well, that's the stuff that makes your shoulders hurt. Overuse. What I tell people is some of that too, if their shoulders are hurting, if you consider that you have overuse from other movements you're doing too much of, and because the bench is the heaviest thing you do, you're feeling it on the bench, right? Meaning, if something is hurting and inflamed because you've just flat out overused it, and you have inflammation, when are you going to feel it? You're very likely to feel it when you're doing the biggest, heaviest loads that you put on it, right? Learn to bench correctly. Learn to balance things. Program correctly. Shoulders shouldn't be hurting on the bench. Usually wrist cocked back, pressing too high on the chest. Right? And of course, bouncing. In some cases, gripping too wide for your anatomy. Those are all factors. But it's not the bench press itself. It's a correctly performed movement. It's overuse. Those things. That's what's causing you to hurt. Nothing inherent about the bench press that should make it a painful movement. But we come over to the point of if you're doing goofball stuff like that on the bench, removing the bench or replacing it with something else to where you're going to do goofball stuff also is not going to resolve the problems. It's also not going to make your chest grow either. Okay? Do the lifts correctly. Right? Do the lifts correctly. And again, it comes down to training IQ. If you have a muscle that you want to make sure that it gets worked on in exercise, figure out how to perform an exercise in such a way that it biases the muscle you're trying to hit. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.